And welcome. Thank you for tuning in today. You're listening to The Adam Messer Show, and I'm your host, Adam Messer, where I talk with authors, artists, and entertainers. We talk about their process, we also talk about their projects, and overcoming obstacles. Thank you for checking out the show. Thank you for tuning in. You are listening to WRU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. And this is the Adam Messer Show. I'm your host, Adam Messer. And I'm here today with my special guest. This is the second hour with Jennifer Jenkins. Welcome back, Jennifer. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And we're talking today about Jennifer's new book, American Bourbon. So if you missed the first hour, don't worry. You can go back onto the podcast, youtube.com/Adam Messer, or The Adam Messer Show on all your favorite podcasts outlets, different apps or whatever. So go back and listen to that. So this hour, we're going to be talking more about the book and the history of like bourbon and stuff like that. And Jennifer and I were talking over the break about some things that she wanted to bring up. And so I thought it was interesting. So yeah, Jennifer, do you want to take it away?
Sure. One of the things that really the focus of this book, it's a family of modern day moonshiners, and they are very successful, but they're also very dysfunctional at the same time. And probably we all have a little bit of that in our families from time to time. The McKinsey family that we feature in the book is one that really sort of takes it to extremes. So we start out with the patriarch of the bourbon sweet tea empire, which is what they produce, the McKinseys, with the patriarch Caleb McKinsey, who is outside, and all of a sudden he experiences not too far away these explosions happening out in the mountains. He realizes that because of the timing of them, and they almost knock him off his feet, that these are well timed explosions, and they are most likely coming from a friend of his who is probably blowing up his own stills. So this is where we start with how to make bourbon, or how to get rid of bourbon, maybe along the same lines, because they do the same thing. The difference is that Caleb McKinsey has bought all the licenses and built the big shiny warehouses so that he could be legal. His friend Seamus, on the other hand, has not done that. He has kept himself underground, and that is a big risk that Caleb is afraid today may not have paid off exactly. Um, so he's not certain what to do with his friend, because Caleb is a very big name in the bourbon world. And he would really like to have one of his children. He has four children, basically: Lonnie, Mac, Kieran, and Bridget. Um, but the only one who's still speaking to him is Lonnie, the oldest. And in fact, Lonnie was a boy that Caleb, before he even met the other children's wife, or mother, excuse me, Lonnie was a boy that he adopted because Caleb found him abandoned sleeping in his barn. And that's one of the things I also wanted to really focus on, is the big differences in between. You think about this wonderful big shiny still and how much money Caleb makes, which is an astounding amount of money. And yet when you go back into the hills and the mountains where moonshine was first created, there is such an abject level of poverty that, in essence, what happened with Lonnie was he came home one night and his family was gone. They lived in a one room shack way back in the mountains, and they had decided that he should be old enough to take care of himself by now. He was 7 years old. So this is how he comes to join in the McKinsey family. And then Caleb actually takes a trip to Ireland, where his entire family is from, and he meets his wife, Maeve, who is wonderful and saucy, and her father also makes whiskey in Ireland. You can't call it bourbon, though, because that can only be created in America. So he brings her over to Virginia where they live, and then they have the three children, Mac, Kieran, and Bridget, the youngest. And she is younger. The two boys, Mac and Kieran, they call them Irish twins because they were born less than a year apart. So they were busy. But then Bridget was actually born almost 8 years later. So she really is, in essence, the baby of the family. Mac is the one who goes full force into the distilling business as a child. However, he gets a little too excited about it, drinks a little bit too much, and then stops himself and says, I can't drink anymore. I need to back away from this. His brother Kieran is one of those people that has all the friends in the world. Everyone loves Kieran. He's kind, he's sweet, he's funny, he's just the person that everyone wants to be around all the time. And so, unfortunately, when Bridget is just 2 years old, they lose Maeve to a very tragic accident for which Mac continues to blame himself for the rest of his life. Um, and so it was the brothers that really help to raise Bridget within this whole idea of making bourbon. Also, Caleb goes a little off the deep end after Maeve, his wife, dies and doesn't pay quite as much attention. He starts to drink much more heavily, and there is a lot of alcoholic abuse within the family. So the boys try to take care of Bridget. Unbeknownst to most of the people in the town, Bridget actually gets to pay a lot of attention to what's going on because we're in the South, we're in the mountains, and she's a girl, so no one really expects her to be paying attention as she is. And she has the best or most fascination, I guess, with bourbon, how it's distilled, how it's made, and the future of what they can do with bourbon. So she sort of appoints herself as the one to take over Bourbon Sweet Tea, in essence, and create something that's really lasting that goes beyond. She wants to make this a destination town. She wants to have a new shiny hotel and a tasting room. She wants to build golf courses so that people will come and do things, and horse stables so that they can go riding and things like that, and really put a bigger mark on the world than simply bourbon along with that. So they get to a point, unfortunately, when Bridget has her high school graduation where there is a big face off between Mac and Caleb. Mac not drinking anymore and being maybe just a little too high and mighty about it, and Caleb, who has gone completely off the deep end. A fight starts between the two of them, which then unfortunately leads into a fight for most of the class of seniors that are graduating with Bridget, and it turns into an all-out brawl through the entire town. And this is the point at which they all start to go their separate ways. So that's the background that we have when we start the book, where Caleb wants to be able to reach out to his children and say, what are we going to do about Seamus? The ATF is here and there are government agents, but he can't because none of them are talking any longer. So we have to try to get this family that is so fractured back into something that they can appreciate themselves. They can try to stick together just a little bit more and become a family, like maybe like they never were since Maeve died. So that's where we start with Bourbon Sweet Tea.
And when you wrote this book, did you model it after any real folks or any real stories? Like, because I know you did a lot of historical research on bourbon and things like that. Did you did you use any of that? Like, did you interview anybody, or did you do the same kind of thing with the character development?
I had a friend who was living in Virginia at the time who said, I know a lot of people down here, and I know some people that are making some moonshine. If you want to come down and do the research, I would be happy to be your guide. And I was so fortunate with that. So I did go down to Virginia to do just this. And he took me around to different towns. The town of Touraine, that is where the book is set, is close to Charlottesville. It is actually modeled on a town that's there, but I decided that they may not want to be this famous, or maybe it's infamous, so I did change the name there. When we were going on the tour around the town of simple things, there are a couple of banks here, there are a couple of churches here, and bars. We went out into the mountains, and so my friend was explaining to me the fact that, this would be a good spot because there is a stream here that you really can't see from the road. So you would have to drive back into it. That would make it a little bit safer for a moonshiner so that it wouldn't be really open. So we would get out and we would walk a little bit and we would follow these streams up. And at one point he said, okay, we're going to stop right here. We're going to very slowly turn around and just walk back to the road. We're not going to be in a hurry because I've just seen a still that is next to the water, and it is not an old one. It is probably active, which means that there are probably people with guns watching us to see what we're going to do. So let's just head back. So we did very slowly.
There you go.
Got into the truck, and he just sped out of there as fast as he possibly could.
Oh, there you go. That's cool. Yeah, I think that's interesting how with fiction you can, and especially like with that genre of fiction, it's not really fantasy or anything like that. It's more just based off of real life. I think it's interesting too how you can interweave those different aspects of the believability, the I guess when you're writing and you want the reader to be immersed in that story, so I think it's pretty cool.
There were quite a few people that I hooked up with, and they were very gracious in talking with me and giving me some background of what they had gone through and what their families had gone through, all on the proviso that they remain anonymous, which is absolutely fine with me. But little different pieces within the book are some things that people have said to me, this is what I found, or one day I was walking and this was nailed to a tree. It was a boot and I didn't stop to see if there was a foot still into it. So things like that really, I think, help to visualize the entire process for people, make it a little bit more alive, if you will.
I always thought it was interesting. Like after my father passed away in 2006, I started doing some family research and trying to find more about his side of the family, because we didn't really talk to his side of the family, and I found a lot of just stranger than fiction type stuff. Like truth is stranger than fiction,
Mm-hmm.
and going back, my father's side of the family is related to like Stonewall Jackson and the Hatfields and McCoys, because they were all in that area. And
Wow.
there was talking about crazy. I actually got to do the station ID already, but I've got a crazy story to tell you. You're listening to WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. So this is not too far off in the distant past of my father's family, and it's a little gory, but it fits right in with the Appalachia, like how people are in that area. Very just tough, rugged people. So my father's father had his mother and father had like 8 or 9 kids, and one of the kids passed away from tuberculosis. And back then they did the viewing at the house. They didn't, have funeral homes and stuff like that. They did the viewing at the house or whatever. And so my dad's, I guess his grandmother and his grandfather were not together. They weren't divorced, but they weren't together.
Right.
And so, and this guy's name was Samuel, and Samuel thought it would be a good idea to bring his new friend with him to the viewing of their son that had died from tuberculosis. And so Nora, and this is a story that I heard, but Nora, upon seeing this woman in the house with Samuel, went to the kitchen and got a kitchen knife and slit the woman from ear to ear. Didn't kill her. But they acquitted her because she was a grieving mother, and they said she was temporarily insane from the grieving of her child or whatever. And that's one of the things that one of the stories that I heard, and that there's a lot of a lot of criminal element on that side of the family, but there are different stories about those boys being in shootouts and all kinds of stuff like that. And they were down in little hollers in Knox County, Kentucky, which is like the Daniel Boone National Park. And there's all kinds of stories like that. So, and I'm sure living in that part of the country that they probably were moonshining too. So I wouldn't have put it past something like that. And I mean, so, but those people from Appalachia, there are a lot of there's a lot of abstract poverty there. I mean, just like if you look into the stories about the mining towns where
Yes.
generations of people worked for mining companies that paid them in company money, and
Right.
they lived on company housing, they bought company food, they had company clothing, and they were always in debt to the company, and they worked for them 80, 90, 100 hours a week, and
Yes.
so I think it's kind of interesting when you're talking about this family, because it would have taken a lot of money to be able to build legit brewery, especially in an area like that.
It would. And I think a lot of what happens with moonshine is people, like you say, working for these coal mining companies and being so in debt and just getting farther and farther behind was a way for them to say, this is maybe how we can start to pull ourselves out of it. Maybe we can have something for ourselves. It was simply survival for a lot of people. Um, Looking at the extras of, well, we've got a little bit of this, we can put this together and people seem to like it and we can sell it, and going forward, because it was that um, really sort of stand up idea of America that I can make my own, I can stand on my own 2 feet, I can produce my
Hmm.
own things, I don't have to be beholden to anyone else. And
Well, when
so,
when you and everybody does not have, they don't have money, you
right,
barter and you trade,
right,
and people, they'd be willing to trade things because nobody had money,
right.
and so if you had something that people wanted, like bourbon or whiskey or whatever, yeah, people. I mean, I don't care what time of history you go to, alcohol is always going to be a thing that people want.
Yes.
So.
And for the most part, really, even still today, the moonshiners do not make a lot of money. As you said, there was a very big barter system that continues today because it is illegal unless you get all the licenses. So even going back into Caleb's history was, okay, I'm going to give you a gallon of moonshine and you're going to give me tires for my car, and that's the way we're going to play things out. What do you have that
What do
I
you mean I'm
need?
gonna give you tires of that car? You only gonna give
Exactly.
me 1 gallon? That's my
Get
best
moonshine.
Kentucky my best Kentucky accent impression. Yeah. No, that's the funny thing about it. Like with bartering, it can be pretty shrewd.
Yes.
People they're not going to just be like, well, because it's always on that side of bartering. The person's always going to offer less for something they want, that they think is worth more, and then the
Right.
person that's got the thing that they're, trading, they're always going to want to get more for what they're trying to trade than what they
Right.
feel like it's worth. So somebody will buy something from you for $10 if they feel like it's worth 20. You know,
Right.
but if they think it's worth $10, they're not going to give you $20 for it.
Exactly.
And I
Yes.
think that's one of the things, like, people don't understand about that culture, or being in Appalachia or having family like that. Seeing it firsthand, it's just kind of funny because it's a different way of living and thinking, and it's a different way of surviving. And I mean,
Hmm.
like, I don't blame the guy for saying, hey, let's turn back around and let's not get shot today because we found a still.
And I did thank
I'm an
him in the
author. I'm an
book.
author. I'm really an
Oh,
author.
that would be even worse because you can't tell their
Right, right.
stories.
What do you mean?
There was a great I don't know if you're familiar with Popcorn Sutton, if you've heard of him.
No.
Um, there was a TV show actually on, and I'm gonna say I think it was the Discovery Channel. It was called Moonshiners, and it was about people modern day who are back in the woods and they're making all kinds of moonshine. And at one point, they did reference Popcorn. He had been making moonshine for a very long time, and he looked like he was straight out of Central Casting. He's got the big old beat up hat on his head and the long gray beard, and he's got the old Model A truck and just everything with him. He actually got to a point where he invited a film crew to come down and he said, I'm going to show you how we really do this because this TV stuff, yes, this,
You there?
oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Popcorn Sutton invited a film crew down to work with him, and he wanted to show the world what it was really like to make moonshine. He had them all blindfolded before he would take them up into the mountains to his outfit. And he called it, This is the last run of liquor I'll ever make. And it is a fascinating film. I believe you can find it on YouTube, believe it or not. But he was quite the character. So there are still people that exist, and this is modern. I do talk a little bit about Popcorn Sutton and what's happened to him in the book, but these things do still go on today, especially. So, if you may already know some moonshiners, you may know some people who are just so nice. They might be very quietly
For legal
happy.
purposes, I do not know anyone who is a moonshiner.
No, of course not. Of course you don't.
I don't.
Yes.
I'm just saying, like, if I did, I wouldn't. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know that they were moonshiners. I just wouldn't. So
Honestly, that's exactly what I'm saying is you wouldn't know because they really don't share that information. I've had one person that I know for a fact, and this is up in Pennsylvania, who has admitted to me that he is a moonshiner. He invited me to a barbecue and he gave me this little tiny glass of wine and said, Here, try this. And I was just affronted. Well, I can drink more than that. What is it with this little Dixie cup? And he said, Well, just tell me what you think. And it was pretty strong, but boy, it was good. And
hmm
so he said, Well, do you want another one? And I said, Yes. So I had 3 or 4 of those. And I stood up and I fell down.
yeah, yeah. That's the whole thing about that kind of. It just depends, like you said, the quality of the ingredients and the
Yes.
way that people make things. Um, I It's been a long time since I had any kind of homemade hooch like that, moonshine or whatever you want to call it. I haven't had any, like, oh man, probably since like '97 or '98. Like, I had
Mm,
moved. Well, no, not '98. I moved to Savannah in '96, and I had a friend of mine. We were at a party, a barbecue type thing again, and there was somebody that had some clear liquor in a mason jar, and it was the same kind of
Oh,
thing. It was like, just real. Of course, back then I was, I drank probably more than my fair share of it, but yeah, it was pretty strong.
yes, it is. That is the thing is you have to be very careful with your moonshine. And one of the things also that really impressed me with the people that I talked to, including my friend here in Pennsylvania, is the sense of pride they have out of producing this. He was actually open enough to take me out and show me one of the things that there's lots of berries up here, especially in this region. So he used a lot of elderberries, and he would show me where they were growing and how he had helped them to make sure that they had the right soil and everything else going on so he could add them into his moonshine. And the way that he fermented things, what he put in to what he called his moonshine, he was really proud of this. Now, I will tell you this, it is not illegal to produce it. It is illegal to sell it. So there is a difference, and that varies actually state to state. So you do have to be very careful if that's something that you want to pursue, because you obviously can get yourself in a lot of trouble. I know for my friend, he produces a very small amount. He will have a party. He will say to people, I want to invite you to my barbecue. One of you in that car is going to have to drink some water because we need a designated driver because the rest of you will barely be able to walk when you leave here.
Yeah, I before I quit drinking, I had made one of those like homemade mead things or whatever. Like they sell
Oh,
those. You can buy those little kits or whatever, and I
right.
tell you, I I made it with like a honey mead or whatever, and I missed a big step in the process.
Uh-oh.
I let it sit and ferment and all that other stuff, and then I didn't filter it off, and
Oh,
so like I didn't realize that you're supposed to strain it and pour it through and all that other stuff. So it came out so bitter and nasty. I mean, it was just disgusting. And I ended
oh.
up throwing the whole batch away, and I never did it again. But I just thought it was so cool because like it's kind of like when you make your own bread, from scratch,
Right.
you know. Um, and I always thought it was neat because like you can take, for example, like if you don't have yeast, you can take a bowl of water, let it sit out overnight, put a little bit of flour on top of it, and it'll make yeast overnight, and then you have yeast water, so you can make your
Hmm.
own bread or whatever you want to make with yeast.
Hmm.
And there's all kinds of neat little things that you can learn how to do, that are not processed or manufactured or whatever. I mean, kind of like when you grow your own vegetables in your own vegetable garden.
Right.
So I think it's kind of cool, or like you hear about people that are raising backyard chickens and they get their own eggs and stuff like that. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool.
Yeah, it really is.
I
And
think that's
there's a
kind of like
big
the spirit
difference.
of doing making people that make their own bourbon or whatever. That this like you were talking about, sense of pride in their the way that they make it and the way it comes out and all that. And I
Yes.
mean, anything that you create by hand. I mean, like a book. You write a book, and you have
Right.
a book at the end of it. You're like, wow, this is the culmination of all that hard work.
There you go. And it's all about bourbon.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But
Well,
see, and that's the wonderful thing. As much as I loved to um, research the history of bourbon and the kind of people and how far back it went, really at the core of it all, it's really about family because I like to be able to give people a relationship that they can say. And I've had the good fortune to talk to some people who have read the book and said, this character really resonated with me because of this and this. Or someone else will say, gee, I really loved Caleb, even though he was a jerk because of this and this. And when they're telling you this, this is something that is in their family that they have experienced that makes them say, oh, now I understand a little bit better. Someone else has gone through the same thing.
hmm.
And I really think it helps people to be able to think about ways that they can relate to the people in their family. And maybe when certain people that you're related to aren't so wonderful to you, there might be a good reason why. And maybe you can just stop for a minute and say, hey, what are you going through? Let's talk about that and try to get back to a good sense of family, I think.
Yeah. We've got to do this station break real quick, Jennifer. Give me just a second here, and we'll be back in about 2 minutes.
Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul.
Enjoy great art songs, opera arias, and a solo recital in the beautiful rotunda of the Telfair Academy as part of the 9th season of the Savannah Voice Festival from August 8th through August 22nd. More information about the festival and tickets can be found at www.savannahvoicefestival.org.
All right, and instead of playing the other one about the individual donations, I just want to take a minute and talk about the donations that we ask for here at the station WRUU. So we're all a non-profit community radio station. We all are volunteers. I'm a volunteer. This is my 3rd year doing it. My good friend Bill Cooper, whose show is up next, so you always hear us laughing and joking around. He's been here for like 4 years. A couple other people have been here the same time, very few. But we all volunteer our time, and we do this because we love it. I enjoy being able to talk with guests like Jennifer, about her book and about process of writing and, those kind of things. And so when we ask you for a donation, it's so that we can support the show, not paying people because we don't get a salary, but stuff like the lights, the utility bills, being able to have a nice studio to work in, the equipment, we've had to do several equipment upgrades, the internet connectivity, and those things. So the money that we ask you to donate goes towards those items. It goes towards helping operate the studio and the cost of the studio, not anything else. It doesn't go towards paying salaries or anything like that, because there aren't any salaries. We're all volunteers. And so if you have enjoyed this show, or if you've enjoyed any of the shows that we have on WRUU, and you come back and you listen and you're a supporter, we really appreciate it. I mean, I think it's just wonderful. If you are on the fence and you've never thought about donating, it is, we are a nonprofit, so you can use it as a donation, as a tax write-off or whatever, for a nonprofit organization. And it's super easy to donate. You can go to WRUU.org. You can go on there, and there's a donate button. You can donate one time, or you can set up multiple donation, like a monthly donation or whatever, whatever level of support you want to give. If you are not able to support us financially, that's not a problem at all either, because times are tough out there, y'all. But an in-kind way that you can support us is by talking to people about our radio station and talking to them and letting them know that you like our station, or sharing it on your favorite social media platforms, or when the podcast comes out, with Jennifer, share it with people and let them know, hey, I listened to this show, and you might enjoy it. That's a way that you could support us as well without having to make a monetary donation. So, that's my my spiel for today, and I appreciate y'all listening. I enjoy doing this show, and that's one of the reasons why I don't edit out the WRU stuff for my podcast. I leave it in there because I figure I'm doing the radio show here, and when people listen, I want them to be able to hear it, that it was live on the radio. To me, doing a radio show is so much fun. I enjoy it so much. And then to be able to, have the opportunity to do this for 3 years, if you'd asked me when I was a kid growing up, listen to the radio, listen to talk shows and stuff like that one day I would grow up and I would be a talk show host myself, I would have been like, what are you talking about? So thanks y'all for, tuning in and listening. Thanks for considering doing a donation to WRUU. And thank you for supporting my show, The Adam Messer Show, and being able to bring guests like Jennifer Jenkins on. So thanks. So Jennifer, I think when you're talking about those relationships, like that's a huge thing for me. I am a relationship based person. I mean, we all have to do transactions. That's part of life. You have to have transactions. But one of the things I have recently personally discovered is that not everybody's your friend, and it's okay. People can be acquaintances.
Yes.
And it's one of those things. It really depends on, like, do you have a relationship with a person or is it transactional? And it's okay to have acquaintances that you have transactional, relationships with. It's okay, as long as you know that. And I think when you talk about family dynamics or friendships or whatever, when they're like, your book is about a dysfunctional family and they don't talk to each other and they're not part of each other's lives, and they get this this crisis where the distillery or whatever is in jeopardy or whatever, and they have to come together to figure out how to fix the problem or whatever. Everybody has different things in their life that they have to deal with, and I feel like when we are able to share those stories with other people, that maybe people don't vocalize, maybe they don't talk about it, but we're able to share those stories and someone can hear it, and they're like, oh, well, yeah, I deal with a guy like, Uncle Bob, who's just really difficult to deal with, and nobody likes him because he's such a hard case to deal with. Not knowing that, Uncle Bob was the guy that grew up, abandoned in a, mine shaft, shanty town,
Exactly. Yes.
So I think it's interesting. I think that's a great part of storytelling, how we can share and we can also express our humanity through storytelling. Everything we learn is through storytelling, in one way or another.
It really is. And I think also along with that, there's a lot of, in a book, for me, I know something that really grabs me is when the characters learn things about people, especially within families, that they never knew, that are surprising, that would go forth and say, oh, this is why you are like this, or this is what happened in the past. These are the secrets, because every family has secrets that will keep people either together or completely blow them apart.
And I think of the Grinch. That's such a great story of, a person or, a creature or whatever, this character who everybody is like, oh my gosh, it's the Grinch, and they don't know why, the Grinch is like that, and,
Right.
and it's such a great character, the way that, he changes at the end, you know what I mean? But that's, and people aren't always going to change. I mean, you can understand them all day long, and they're still not going to, Uncle Bob's still going to be, cantankerous and ornery and, difficult to deal with, and, so, but it's easier to understand what,
yes,
where they're coming from.
Exactly.
Not that you have to agree with them, or not that you have to support what they're doing, but,
Right.
To be able to at least empathize and understand,
Yes.
I'm not saying that, empathy and understanding does not mean compliance, or does not mean that, you support it. It just means that you understand it and, you empathize with, their situation. It doesn't mean that you're like, hey, oh, yeah. I think people get that confused sometimes.
I think you're right, because if more people could say, I'm going to step back and really listen to what it is that you have to say, even though I don't agree with it, you have every right to say it. And people might learn to relax a little bit more, to say, okay, this is why you believe that. Maybe we could even have a discussion about things. And I think that's really would be such a wonderful thing to do. I think that a lot of that also comes out of literature, as well as people trying to say, hey, maybe you don't agree with this, but here, I'm going to tell you why it's like this. And people can step back. And I actually was talking to someone yesterday who's very much a mountain man, who it shocked me to find that he read the book, and he came up to talk to me about it.
Oh.
And different things that he was saying about the book places that he really related to that I never even thought about. And so it really helps to be able to, and we could not have more difference of opinion on pretty much everything.
Right.
But the fact that he was able to take this and say, now I can see a little bit where this might come from. And then I could also, at the same time, when he was talking, think he really gave thought to this, even though we have vast differences of opinion. And so I think it helped both of us to realize that, hey, we both have some things that are valid that we can appreciate about each other. And boy, if that's the end of your day, that's a good day.
Oh yeah, I'll give you an example from my personal life. I do industrial electrical work, and coming from, I was an adult, student going back to college, and I was 32 before I graduated my bachelor degree, and I was in my mid 30s when I graduated from my graduate degree and all, and worked at a college, worked at a university for 10 years, and then right before I turned 41, when I was 40, I got into this apprenticeship for the for the electrical program. And it's really interesting, how the dynamics of the different working worlds are, when you're doing like blue collar industrial work versus doing like office work, and how disjointed, like there's not a lot of communication that goes on between those two worlds. There's a lot of like stereotypes, and there's a lot of like, jests and jokes on both sides about, whatever. But I think there's also a lot of misconception too.
Yes.
And there's a lot of you have good points for both sides, and you have bad points for both sides.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the things, like when you're talking about with how people could come together. It does really come down to having that respect for other people, and being able to you don't necessarily have to agree with them, but being able to just be civil about communication. And sometimes it's just it takes the point of walking away from communication when it's not, if someone is not going to be civil, or if they don't respect or respectable with their behavior, you can't change somebody's mind. You can't, convince them that your point's right and their point's wrong. People have to discover for themselves, and sometimes I feel like it's just, it's just better to walk away than, to argue with somebody. So
I agree. And there's an awful lot of that in the book, because I will tell you what, Caleb McKenzie is convinced he is never, ever wrong. And he comes to find out that might not be true. So
that is really interesting, because most narcissist people that I've ever met never, ever come to that point where they realize that they're wrong.
Right.
So it's interesting that your character developed like that, because I've really rarely ever met a person who's a narcissist who would ever change. What do you mean? Like, I don't know. So that's kind of neat that your character does that. I'm not saying that your character is necessarily a narcissist, but it kind of sounds like one. So
he is, and that was one of the things that I actually talked to this person about was but I'd like to know more about how he grew up, because there's just a little bit of his history in the book as well. And he said to me, "Can you make that book too?"
There you go.
I will get right on that.
Make a short story about that one. That would be great. Yeah, we could talk about narcissism like for hours and hours and hours.
Yes.
Yeah, it's so funny. I saw this video. There was a guy that put a video on there saying, "Don't try to gaslight me, because I grew up with a narcissistic mother who had a victim mentality, and I will know if you're trying to gaslight me." And I was like, man, if that is not so true, like if you've ever been around someone like, and you're talking about, dysfunctional family, like dysfunctional families, a lot of people have dysfunctional families, but when you're talking about like that, and then you're the one that gets away from that or escapes from that, and you figure out like, oh, well, this is why, and then you see it in other people. You're like, ding, 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 ding. And then you're like, well, and like the guy that you're talking about, like, he wants to know more. He's like, I lived this. I was around this,
Mm-hmm.
and you just have this fascination, or like, you have this curiosity, like, why do people act like that? You never know. So I think it's a neat topic that you explore with your characters and your family.
Yes.
So, hey, everybody, you're tuning in today to WRUU LP Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings Community Radio with Global Soul. This is the Adam Messer Show, and I'm your host, Adam Messer, here today with my special guest, Jennifer Jenkins, author of American Bourbon. And I think it's fascinating that you did all this research. What do you feel like you discovered throughout the process of writing this book, and maybe something that you learned either in general or about yourself, or through the process of writing this book?
I think a lot of what came out of this was to be able to really concentrate on each character and the development and why they do the things that they do. There really isn't a lot of black and white in the world. You can have terrible characters and you can have wonderful characters, but even a great character every once in a while, might feel the need to kick a dog. And that's just human nature. So if you can figure out, but why is that happening? What has happened to you? What are you going through? What is in your past that has brought you to this point? But one of the most shocking things, believe it or not, that I found out of this, and I have since found people who are really into this have said to me, oh yes, I've read about that, is that the whole idea of NASCAR actually started out with moonshine. And it started out in Georgia. Did you know that?
I actually did know that, but I would love to hear what you learned about it.
I will admit that I have been to a couple of stock car races in my time, so I know what it looks like. But a lot of in pretty much every moonshine family, you were always going to find that one person who loved to drive no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
That was really their focus, and they were going to go as fast as they could. And it was very important for you to be able to take care of the car too, because they weren't expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And so that led them to, on the off times, they would get together in fields and they would just have these little informal races against each other, mountain families, bringing their cars. Well, when the mountain families would bring their cars, then other people started to show up just to watch. And this, of course, got bigger and bigger and bigger. And one of the biggest ones, and I have to say alleged moonshiner, was Raymond Parks, who started bootlegging at age 14. So he was one who was really into driving as well. And he hooked up with Bill France, who was a stock car driver. His moonshine fame was pretty legendary at the time. And Bill France actually went on to recruit a lot of drivers from North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, gathering them together and forming this association for stock car racing, which turned out to be NASCAR. So when you think about that, now a lot of people say, yes, those drivers are wonderful, and they really came up from working with people who were bootleggers, who were rum runners, who were driving moonshine over old country roads in the middle of the night with no lights, because that was their focus. This was something that they had to do for survival.
Yeah.
And when you're doing it for that reason, it really resonates with people to say, this is how you drive a stock car. And I just thought that was fascinating.
I think that's also pretty interesting, technology, like we were talking last hour, how technology changed, throughout the history of American bourbon, and transportation, for example, that would be a great example of, how technology changed to the way that they transported it. I mean, look at today, look at the stuff today. And I don't drink anymore, but there's the stuff they call it like moonshine, that it's, mass produced stuff that is,
Right.
It's, I don't know how to say it, but it reminds me of kind of like a fast food version of bourbon or whatever.
Yes. Have a steak burger. Not really steak, but okay, you can call it that if you want to.
It's not even it's not even steak before they mince it up, right?
Exactly.
It was beef and part of other things. But yeah, it's just funny. It just reminds me of that. And I mean, don't get me wrong. It just kind of reminds me of that story you were saying about how they were doing peach bourbon, with
Yeah.
a limestone, creek or whatever, and real fresh peaches. And then when they switched over, they were using city water and distilled peach syrup and cooking it in copper pots. It's just not the same.
Yes.
So, but yeah, so I'm really excited that you've been on the show. I thank you very much, Jennifer, for being on here. Where can people find out more information about you and your book?
People can go to both Instagram and to Facebook, and they can look for American Bourbon, the book. It is on both of those apps as well. The funny thing is that Facebook has sort of declined to let me promote the book in the way that I would like because they think it's alcohol. And
Right,
although I've
right.
had the conversation several times, they just don't get it. So we let that go. They can also go to my website, which is jenniferjenkinsauthor.com, and that will give links to different bookstores. You can get it at Amazon. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. I also like to send people to a site called bookshop.org, which reaches out to local bookstores to help them along. There are links there to some reviews, places that I have gone out to do readings and festivals and things like that. So that's also a good resource. It's jenniferjenkinsauthor.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for being on the show today, and wish you wonderful success with your book.
Thank you, Adam. This has been so much fun. I have a virtual cheers to you.
That's awesome. So, well,